Welcome to another episode of Heffron on History. Today we're going to do things a little bit different. Today we're going to talk about something that's beneficial for students but also beneficial for teachers. We're going to talk about student questions and specifically the best student question that I have ever received and how I handled it. How a teacher handles a question from a student is really going to set the mood for the relationship between the student and the teacher. I've heard a lot of teachers answer questions from students like, because I'm the teacher, or because I'm the adult, or because that's the way it is. And it really doesn't tell the student what they really wanted to know. They're actually asking you a legitimate question. I had a student my third year of teaching, my second year at Paul R. Smith Middle School in Holiday, Florida. She asked me a question that just changed my whole way of thinking when it comes to lesson planning and when it comes to relationships with students. I wish I could remember the young lady's name. I do remember the situation, and we were discussing Christopher Columbus. We were talking about his discovery of the New World and that whole story. And she said to me, I remember this like it was yesterday, she said to me, "Mr. Heffron, you're as old as dirt." And she's truly correct about that. I think I was 48 years old at the time. And then she continued, she said, "But even you're not that old. How do I know that that event actually happened?" And I remember this. I remember it like it was yesterday. I stood there for what seemed like an eternity. Realistically, it was probably about 10-15 seconds. I just stood there and I'm trying to think of a good answer. And then it dawned on me, a little light bulb went off in my brain. And I walked over to my classroom library. Every teacher should have a classroom library, especially if you're a social studies teacher, because you have at your fingertips all the information you could ever want. Oh, sure, there's the internet, and it has the wide world of information. However, I pulled out of my library this book, The Log of Christopher Columbus. And having this book and actually being able to hold it up, I think really reinforced this situation. So she said, "How do I know that that event actually happened?" Because he wrote it down. And this was my first opportunity to introduce primary source evidence to my students. Because I said, Christopher Columbus, he kept a diary. This is essentially a diary, right? And then we talked about what different types of primary sources there are, from newspapers to paintings to photographs, to letters to diaries. And then I opened it up. And I said, Christopher Columbus recorded everything. The good things, the bad things, exactly what he was thinking on any one given day. And then when he got back to Spain, he could write a book and he could make himself famous. That's why we know about Christopher Columbus today. And so I said, I'm going to read from this book about the discovery of land. On, let's see, this is the 10th of October in the year 1492. I read this. About 10 o'clock at night, while standing on the stern castle, I thought I saw a light to the west. It looked like a little candle bobbing up and down. It had the same appearance as a light or a torch belonging to fishermen or travelers who alternately raised and lowered it, or perhaps were going from house to house. I'm the first to admit that I was so eager to find land that I did not trust my own senses. So I called for Pedro Gutierrez, the representative of the king's household, and asked him to watch for the light. After a few moments, he too saw it. I then summoned Rodrigo Sanchez of Segovia, the comptroller of the fleet, and asked him to watch for the light. He saw nothing, nor did any other member of the crew. It was such an uncertain thing that I did not feel it was adequate proof of land. And then at 2 hours after midnight, the Pinta fired a cannon, my prearranged signal for the sighting of land. I now believe that the light I saw earlier was a sign from God, and that it was truly the first positive indication of land. When we caught up with the Pinta, which was always running ahead because she was a swift sailor, I learned that the first man to sight land was Rodrigo de Triana, a seaman from Lepe. How do we know that that event actually happened? Because Christopher Columbus is speaking to you from 500 years across history. And then I went on to say there's a whole community of historians that just live this stuff, such as myself, and we just gobble this stuff up, and we always look for evidence of the past to help tell the stories of the past. I now remember this question every time I'm making a new lesson, because I know that students are thinking this. I have been asked this exact question numerous times since. Every year I relay this story to my students, and yet every year they still continue to ask me this question. Teachers should always encourage their students to ask them questions and always strive to come up with the best answer. How do I know that that actually happened? It's in a book. Until next time, Heffron on history.